Well, good morning. This is Anthony Parent of IRS Medic, and today we're going to be talking about the exit tax and how some dual citizens can benefit from that dual citizen status. Meanwhile, poor Americans with their just single status get punished. And the first thing that comes up to mind is this sort of dilemma that we have. We are given a mythology that the United States of America was founded as a tax haven, and that we have truth and justice and nothing but. And we have a constitution to protect these inalienable rights. And the amendment that I want to discuss right now is the Fifth Amendment. And the Fifth Amendment doesn't call for equal protection among citizens. However, that is how the Supreme Court has defined it, that the U.S. government is supposed to provide equal protection under the law. That is, you can't treat two different types of people unequally. That would inherently run against due process, where somebody gets one deal, another person gets another deal. My good friend John Richardson has wrote an article about Boris Johnson's most likely exit tax dodge, and we're going to be talking about that today and really showing how I would say the equal protection clause of our Constitution is broken pretty badly. It is pretty obvious that you can have two different outcomes depending on the status of your birth, which seems like it would be a problem. Good morning to you. Good morning to you, John, from wherever you are. So what is going on here?
Well, we're talking about Boris Johnson. What's going on is he's no longer the Prime Minister of the UK. But there's a very, very interesting history, I think, to his U.S. citizenship. And that is that he was actually born in New York City, which would make him a U.S. citizen by birth. He was born to a British citizen father, which made him a British citizen at birth. So in other words, he's a dual citizen at birth. And it seems fairly clear that Boris Johnson would have had more than a $2 million net worth. He renounced U.S. citizenship in 2017, according to the article in The Guardian. My interpretation of it is that he would not have paid an exit tax at all. He would not have been a covered expatriate, which means not only would he have not paid the exit tax, but he would still have been free to have made gifts or bequests to U.S. heirs had he chosen to do that. And the question is, why? Where did he get this preferred status so that he somehow could avoid being a covered expatriate when lowly people like, say, Anthony, perhaps Keith, certainly John, and who knows, maybe even my friend Andy Grossman.
Well, yeah, and a lot of the people, a lot of our viewers here are considering that roads lead to renunciation. Now, the issue is when you renounce, the government wants what it thinks was coming to them. So there's an exit tax you have to pay that you sort of have to start worrying about once your assets are at about over $2 million or so. Now, this includes your retirement assets. So that's what kind of can, muck things up a bit, is that this exit tax can just hit people who are normal people. Just, well, that was my retirement, and that's your entire retirement. So we have a situation where if you are born a dual citizenship, you can have a completely different result than somebody who isn't. And that's really the kind of outrage. And now, look, I think it's great that Boris Johnson was able to escape it. And we assume that he did. We don't know. We didn't get his tax records leaked to us. We're operating on common knowledge that this is what it is. And the exit tax is kind of a nasty little thing, because again, John, and we're going to John's article, and I'll just share this link to John's article in the super chat, so you all can go there, check it out. But really, the problem that we have here is the taxation can be incredibly unfair. So John, just walk us through a little bit about why what's so awful about the exit tax.
Okay, Anthony, let me, full disclosure, I'm sitting here in London, UK this week. which is why the idea of Boris Johnson came to mind. They're all very excited here, by the way, about the Christensen decision, allowing the foreign tax credit. I mean, I got off a plane and they were handing out flyers and, they're like, this is a major celebration. I mean, this is how important this is. But equally importantly, I'm sitting here beside my friend, Andy Grossman, who is, I consider, the world's premier nationality lawyer. Former U.S. Retired. Well, that's one of the reasons why he's the premier lawyer. He's got time to stay on top of all this. Worked for many years with the State Department, and I think a great addition to the conversation. I mean, Andy, you want to say hello here?
Yeah, this is great, Andy.
Yeah. Yes, I was, for more than 20 years, I was a U.S. Foreign Service officer, born in New York. I happened to be a Swiss citizen through my mother. But what I really want to talk about briefly, in reflection of what you said, is my eldest daughter renounced. She was born in London in 1970 when I was here as a student. And in those days, you got citizenship by jus soli. She never lived in the United States. As a result of that, her son, born here, is not a U.S. citizen. She renounced because he's autistic and gets very substantial state benefits that coupled with paying off the mortgage on her flat probably would have bankrupted her with the IRS. But of course, when we filled out, I did all the work for her. We filled out the 8854. She is exempt. She is not a covered expatriate. I have another daughter who lives here. I have a large family, 2 daughters who live here. And she was born in Belfast, Northern Ireland in 1983. By 1983, the UK no longer gave citizenship by reason of birth on its land. But Ireland still did. It doesn't anymore. And because it claimed the 6 counties of the north, she got an Irish passport at birth. Wait for it. Under the Ireland Act 1949, Irish persons are not aliens. Well, if this daughter chose to renounce, and I have no suggestion, she's never suggested that she would, her children aren't American citizens either. Would she come under the same protective law that you were just talking about? Is a person who is not an alien therefore a citizen for this law? It's another case of Congress acting for reasons we may not know, but some member of the committee dreamed up a clause that he or she thought was fair, but creates enormous anomalies. I can leave it there. I have a lot more to say about nationality, but I think that serves the purpose of responding to what you just said.
All right. Well, thank you for that, Andy. The bottom line is simply this, that it's an incredibly unfair, arbitrary provision. But what I would add to this is that it really is an example. The U.S. has citizenship taxation, but apparently it also has citizenship non-taxation, right? And that's what this really is, right? It's an exclusion from rules that apply to everybody else based in part on citizenship, right? And in order to be eligible for this, basically, here's the rules. Okay, 1, you need to be a dual citizen at birth, which, just from public information, clearly Boris Johnson was. You need to continue to be a British citizen, which he was, but you also need at the time of renunciation to be taxed as a resident, okay, presumably meaning a resident of the second.
There's a 10-year rule.
Yeah, that as well. Yeah, but you have to be taxed as a resident, okay, with the UK, and you cannot have had, you can't have met the residence requirements in the US for more than 10 of the previous 15 years. So there's a look back period as well. And what that has done and what this does for a lot of people I work with, I mean a real lot of people I work with because I live in Canada, is they have a preferred status of U.S. citizenship, which essentially allows them to escape covered expatriate status, meaning the exit tax. And this group of people, as well as being exempt from the exit tax, are actually able to make gifts and bequests to U.S. persons, going on down the road. So I see this as almost creating through the tax system. So it's certainly not equal citizenship anymore. It's more like a caste system of citizenship, where the people who are dual citizens from birth are, in a sense, preferred citizens.
Well, let me
Pretty-
remind you that
That's pretty. I do want to go to. I want to go to Keith for his reaction. Keith, do you understand what's going on here? Does it sound pretty crazy?
Well, unfortunately, I got disconnected, so I just signed back in about a minute ago.
Okay, so what we just went over is what it takes for this exception to apply for you. The exception that we believe Boris Johnson likely applied for.
Right.
Here's what it is. So it's these. This is what will get you out of the exit tax. If you are a individuals who shall not be treated as meeting the requirements of here. This is what the exception is. The individual became at birth a citizen of the United States and a citizen of another country, and as of the expiration date continues to be a citizen of and is taxed as a resident of such other country, and you have been a resident for the United States as defined for not more than 10 taxable years during the 15 tax period ending with the taxable year of which you're that's the other one. That's the other one. So if you are, what we're talking about is this exception here. Does that make sense to you?
It does.
Well, okay. So yeah, this seems so as we talked about on previous podcasts with John, and this is really John's analogy that, having your U.S. citizenship is like having the two-door Dodge Stratus. The two-door Dodge Stratus doesn't have the utility of a four-door because it just has two doors, but it's really not sporty. So it's one of these things where it sort of marries the worst of both worlds. And so, as John says, renouncing your U.S. citizenship is like upgrading to the four-door Dodge Stratus, which I would say, and actually, so to apply the analogy even further, is that for certain people, they can upgrade to that Dodge Stratus basically for free. They have that four-door Dodge Stratus that they can get no issue. So you have two different types of outcomes, completely kinds of outcome, depending on the circumstances of your birth. Keith, does that sound like the good old USA would do that?
Of course, there's always the USA loves carve-outs, and this is just yet another carve-out, which certainly is beneficial to a significant number of American immigrants or accidental Americans. So yes.
All right, yeah. I'm gonna go back over to Andy Grossman. I'm sure he's got something to say about this. Right on, Andy. Go ahead.
There's nothing unusual about multiple kinds of American citizenship. First of all, you have non-citizen nationals who, as I understand it, aren't covered by this law. Right. And you have persons who were born or naturalized in Puerto Rico who have always been exempt from estate tax on their Puerto Rican assets. And if I think about it, American citizenship is quite arbitrary. I would bet that a clever immigration lawyer could get American citizenship for at least one of my alien grandchildren, who doesn't want it and isn't going to apply for it. But having been involved in immigration law, I know two things. First of all, nobody understands it fully, even the people who wrote it. And second, if you have a case, you contrive to go before a judge who you think will agree with you. And of course, immigration judges are not Category 3 constitutional judges. They are employees of the Homeland Security Ministry. So I leave that with you. I'm not surprised by any of this. And that's what lawyers do. They try to find loopholes and exclusions for their clients, depending which way they want to go.
Well, so what we have here is, and I guess I never really got, I'm not an immigration attorney. It's not what I do, but I didn't realize, like U.S. tax court, that's the jurisdiction of Article 1. That's an that's an executive body sort of making these judicial determinations. Somehow this is all fine now. Don't worry about it. It's all fine. And I guess this is the thing I wasn't thinking, because likewise, the results that you can get in tax court and even before tax court with the IRS can vary significantly. And the whole job of an attorney is to get the result, a great result for your clients. The results can be night and day depending on your attorney. And so, Andy, what Andy said here is that is likewise with immigration. And I guess that's something I should have realized, that, a huge significant difference in the outcomes, and that there's not a lot of consistency, internal consistency. It depends on how good your attorney is the law, it sounds like. So that's pretty crazy. John, what do you have to say to that?
I would. Immigration law is extraordinarily complex. And I think that, for both immigration and tax, which are two incredibly important areas of U.S. law that, collectively just affect, basically everybody, I think probably you get the results you pay for, and that, that's kind of where it is. I mean, it's definitely not user-friendly. Even lawyers who work in these areas respectively have trouble understanding this stuff. And that's just kind of the way it is. I think, as I've said in the past, or I've seen said in the past, and I would agree with this, I think that the result of this is the United States is not so much a rule of law country as it is a rule by law country, right? Depending on how this stuff is being interpreted.
I have a question, if I may. Is that how does one ascertain, how do I put this? What proof does one need to give that they are a dual citizen from birth? So, for example, let's say an American goes to France and they become a French citizen. Okay, I mean, what proof do you need to show that you're a dual citizen from birth?
That's a great question, Keith. And John, correct me if I'm wrong, but when you're filling out that form 8854, it's just checking the box. I can't think of a time I've uploaded proof of residency. It's basically your claim. Am I right or wrong about that, John?
You're right about that. But that's okay. I mean, you're asking two questions here. Okay. The first is, how would you prove it, and what is it you need to prove? And the second is, what happens in day-to-day practice. Now, in day-to-day practice, the claim of dual citizenship at birth is, I would say, is dealer's choice, right? In the sense that you state it if you want to state it. Presumably, you would state it only if you believe you have justification for it, etc. But I have not seen these things audited. Okay, to be honest, I mean, people just check the box. Andy wants to chime in here. 1 sec. Andy?
Well, it's similar to proving parental residence or presence, which determines whether the child born abroad is a citizen or not. Now, the Supreme Court in 2017, I think, changed the law on that because they said it was sexist. There was a different law applied to unmarried women citizens from unmarried father citizens. Ruth Bader Ginsburg signed that act. And really, the Supreme Court invented a law at the suggestion of the State Department, if you read the Morales-Santana decision. And what you get out of that is that the issue of residence on whether a child born abroad is a citizen or not is just as weird and just as arbitrary of proof as it is with the IRS when you are claiming not to be a covered expatriate. In my experience of having had numerous children born abroad, it depends how the consul the consul is a bureaucrat, and if the consul wants proof, you're put to the proof. If the consul wants to believe you, they accept your attestation as fact.
So I think one thing that, you know, for purpose of simplicity, it probably should be added here is that, would you agree, Andy, that the Morales decision essentially created a number, added to the group of people who would be dual citizens from birth, right?
Took away some and added others.
Yeah. So in other words, you know, there's this sort of ebb and flow. To try to answer Keith's specific question, though, which I think had to do more with, you know, how can you confidently say that you're dual citizens from birth, you know, if you have to defend it. Very clearly, having been through some appeals on citizenship issues to the State Department in Washington, they're going to defer to the law of the country, okay, that's involved. So, you know, you want to claim you are a Canadian citizen from birth, you're going to have to justify that under Canadian law, you know, et cetera. I mean, the U.S. is not like arbitrarily reaching out and saying, you know, obviously you are or not, you know, a citizen from birth of another country, right?
The simplest way is with a passport.
For American citizenship or Canadian. Yeah, okay. If you're entitled, yeah, if you're entitled to
if you happen to have both passports issued at birth, that's the simplest way. A birth certificate won't work because then you have to prove foreign law. You have to get the cooperation of the foreign government, which you may or may not get. That's another issue.
But for example, in France, you don't have to have a passport at birth to be French. So that's why I was asking the question. I'm just using France as an example. A passport does not signify citizenship with France.
Bad example, just a Swiss, just as.
Hold on, no. They're muting you in and out. They're muting you in and out.
Oh,
they are.
It's a bad example because.
Go ahead.
Yeah. Because in effect, France will issue a family. A livret de famille, which is like a birth certificate, even though you were born abroad. I have a livret de famille, a Swiss one, that proves I was a Swiss citizen, even though I was born in New York.
Yeah. Okay. So Keith, I think the general answer to this would be, sure, if you have a passport, great. I suspect most people don't. Would be the birth certificate coupled with tying into the law at the time of the birth, right? I mean, that is how you would go about doing this. But yeah, sure. I mean, something like a passport from birth would be the gold standard, although I suspect few people have that.
Well, if you.
Well, I just want to hear. Here's a comment from Suzanne, and she went through. She one of her oldest had to present the birth records for the U.S. When she had to go through the process. You know, here's what's really, you know, the sort of, I'm having a bit of an aha moment here, as you know, we deal with this complexity of the U.S. tax system, but and it's based on citizenship's taxation, which is also incredibly complex. This is sort of the. Wait, we have two levels of insanity here. We have a tax code that's insane, and we have an immigration law that's also insane. John, Andy, would you agree with that?
Yes.
Yeah, absolutely. I think we both agree with that for sure.
All right, so let's. I want to go. So now, how do we get the gift of U.S. citizenship from birth?
How do we get the gift of U.S. citizenship from birth, or dual citizenship? Hello?
Yeah, so John, how do we get the four possible ways of acquiring dual citizenship at birth?
I've probably already forgotten that, although I put that in this morning. But first of all, I don't think that they were necessarily exclusive, but let's just back up a minute, okay, and be clear, just to reinforce why you might want to consider that, okay? So we start from the principle, I think, that generally speaking, multiple citizenships, dual citizenship, what have you, probably opens up opportunities, okay, probably. So this is a good thing to have. Now, the problem is that for most Americans, they live in the United States. they don't have dual citizenship or anything, and they're planning a family. And so what's going to happen is that the child is going to be born a citizen, a U.S. citizen only, because they were born in the United States. So the question is, how can we arrange for that person to have a second citizenship at birth, right? Okay. Now the first would be, well, obviously, and you see this all the time, if in fact one of the parents was, for example, a Canadian citizen, okay, then that child will be born with dual citizenship under the current laws, both Canadian and U.S.
Or a citizen, we're just of another country. Canada, we're just using as a stand-in.
Could be.
Remember?
So that would be the first, okay, and Canadian citizenship laws have been changed over the last decade or so. So as they stand now, incredibly, even people who were not in earlier years born with Canadian citizenship abroad might be born as a Canadian citizen today because of the application of a law retroactively. But that would be the first.
Oh, so John, so now you have to look into the country's law, not U.S. law, but the country's law to see what makes a citizenship. So you're not just concerned about the law of the United States, whatever country that you're going to claim citizenship, you have to look at that, and that law may change.
Absolutely.
So
Absolutely.
So does American law. Think back at the time when Native Americans and women were not citizens for various reasons. Native Americans were protégés. They were not citizens until, I think, 1924, around that. And women who married an alien, even if they had never left the United States, lost their American citizenship. There are a number of instances in which Congress passed laws, or the courts acted, to grant citizenship to people who had lost it, and those citizens didn't want it back. The IRS, in some cases, has issued letter rulings and pronouncements that said if the former citizen never claimed a benefit of American citizenship during that gap, the IRS will not apply U.S. tax law to that person during that period. The IRS has never consented to not applying unwanted American citizenship that was restored to someone after it was lost. On the other hand, they've never done anything to enforce it against an American citizen, such a person living abroad. But that's just to show you how complex it is. And just because someone was born an American citizen or seems to have been born American citizen doesn't mean that he is or she is legally, and even more, whether practically, whether the IRS is going to enforce that citizenship against them.
Yeah, so look, on this point, okay, very broad strokes. Citizenship can be extremely complicated. All right, it can be extremely complicated, and you have to look at the time of the event happened, the birth or whatever, what the laws were in both countries at that time. Okay, that's the first point here. The second, to go back to your question, what would be ways to be born a dual citizen? Okay, we've talked about the first, right? So you're born to, say, a Canadian citizen parent or whatever. Second would be very simple, to fly down to Mexico. Okay, U.S. citizen parents fly down to Mexico. The kid's born in Mexico. The kid will have dual citizenship from birth, right?
Right.
A third, which is sort of interrelated, would be to explore the ancestry option. Now, there's a difference between dual citizenship and dual citizenship from birth, right? Okay, but certain people would be entitled to Irish citizenship or Italian citizenship under certain circumstances, right?
Interesting you mentioned Irish, because the grant of Irish citizenship used to be retroactive from birth. It no longer is. Now it's from the day that you claim to have the right.
All right. So now Andy's illuminating the distinction between dual citizenship and dual citizenship from birth, right? By getting rid of the retroactivity component of it. It means it starts from the date of application. So, that should be considered, okay, possibly not going to work. But here's a fourth one that is very, very interesting, and I predict it's going to be widely discussed and a hot topic, is surrogate parenting. Okay, surrogate parenting. Okay, I see Andy's eyes are opening wide.
For that, anyone who's interested in the Affairs Manual and all the changes that have been made over the past decade, because it used to be horrific. There's a case of two married men who had children, surrogate children, one of whom was conceded to be a citizen and the other not. I think it went to the courts. I don't know how it ended, but sort of like that Yemeni convenience store manager in the Bronx who discovered he wasn't a citizen at all, and the State Department said the answer would be a special law of Congress.
Yeah. Okay. A couple points on that. First of all, I put out a tweet this morning with a link to the Foreign Affairs Manual. Okay, and with a couple of charts that show, how they think about this. But let's keep this extremely practical. What I'm envisioning by that would be the following. Okay, a situation where you would have a surrogate mother, for example, a citizen of, say, I don't know, maybe say Mexico, a country that would give citizenship based, you want a country that would give citizenship based on the citizenship of the parent, right? Okay, and so the baby would be born with citizenship of country X and hopefully U.S. citizenship as well.
Well, bear in mind that the U.S. and the Ukraine are the two major suppliers of surrogate parents.
Well, maybe you've got to find other ones then.
But yeah, guys, you're kind of doing to me what I do to other people when I talk about tax. This is so utterly, it's just endless. And really, you could create endless situations of endless fact patterns of creating completely wildly different results. And so, yeah, the word arbitrary, really, I don't even know if that seems strong enough in this case. This is insanely insane.
Arbitrary and capricious.
Arbitrary, capricious. Okay, but here's the point that I think needs to be understood. All right, dual citizenship from birth is an opportunity that can be planned for in certain circumstances, and it has tremendous benefits. Now, one of the points of the blog post I wrote, so this doesn't escape people, and this is absolutely reinforced by my experience working with people, is that for people who are dual citizens from birth, there is far less incentive to renounce U.S. citizenship. Okay, far less incentive. It's easier for them to keep it because they could have a net worth of $1 billion, right, and not be subject to the exit tax. I'm going to give you a real example of somebody I was working with just a few weeks ago. She contacted me absolutely clear that she wanted to renounce U.S. citizenship. I mean, normally I would have a discussion. Do you really want to do this? But nope, she had none of that. That's it. I want to renounce. Just have some questions. I want your help. Okay, whatever. All right. I'll help you do this. A week before the renunciation appointment, she gets, all of a sudden out of the blue, well, I'm having second thoughts. All right, should I really do this or not? And I said to her, well, one of the points that I want to make to you that I think matters, and matters big time, is this, that you are a dual citizen from birth. You were born in Canada to an American citizen parent. You're a dual citizen from birth. Therefore, the $2 million thing, the threshold, right? It doesn't matter if you reach that $2 million thing or not, because you're not going to be a covered expatriate as long as you maintain your tax compliance, right? And interestingly, she decided not to renounce. She decided to keep her U.S. citizenship precisely for that reason. She was not under the pressure of reaching that $2 million threshold. So what has happened here is that, one of the reasons that this is a preferred class of citizens is that they are actually able to keep their citizenship regardless of their net worth and renounce down the road, right? Under the current law. So this is an amazing thing where you get people who've never lived in the United States are able to maintain their citizenship with confidence unless the law changes, that they're not going to get shaken down by the exit tax. When other people who were born, say you were a direct descendant of the daughters of the American Revolution or something like that, are under tremendous pressure to renounce before they hit the 2 million thing, or they're going to be subject to a major asset confiscation via the exit tax. Does that make sense to you?
Get it. I get what you're saying, John. That is amazing. So it's the irony. The irony is this, is that if one of the reasons why you would want to renounce your citizenship is because you're afraid of going over that $2 million threshold, and maybe you're over it as it is now. But if you're a dual citizenship, you could leave at any time and not have to pay that exit tax. So who cares? What's the rush now? You always have that card to play. Hey, look, if I want to leave, avoid it, no problem whatsoever. So it creates absolutely. Now I really see what you're talking about. That is a really perverse and certainly a preferred class of citizenship. How could it not be? Now I want to ask a question of Keith here. Because boy, you know what, I would say this, I'm like, man, who would be the person to ask this question of? Let me see here. Who would talk to more people who would be subject to a covered expatriate audit than Keith Redmond? Who would have that large network of 8,000 plus people that he's intimately familiar with their tax situations? So Keith, the question I have is, have we gone over all this complexity? I mean, we probably even just scratched the surface of all this complexity about, how to prove it, what happens. Have you ever heard, and I'll start this off as a tax attorney who's had, I don't know, probably 10, 20,000 people call my office over the last 15 years. I have never, ever had one person ever inquire about a covered expat audit. So my question for you, Keith, have you ever heard of someone who was being audited for leaving the United States? Have you ever heard of that?
No, never. And I've spoken to many, many, many people over the past 14 years. Not one.
And so this is so that the covered expat audit is something everyone's worried about, but I actually haven't encountered it myself. And I'm pretty sure, and I'll have to double check, but the IRS International Division has its practice units up on a website. And their practice units are basically, here's the things on how to audit, here's how to audit them. I don't believe, the last time I checked, I'll have to check again, but they even have a practice unit to do an expat covered audit. They just don't do it. So it's also, you're creating two separate classes of people up kind of through self-help. Hey, look, just, lie on the form. Don't worry about it. No one's ever going to know, apparently, because it never happens. And so, you have people who follow the rules and they get punished. The people who break the rules, don't worry about it, because no one ever does anything about it. Does that sound about right to you, Keith? Is the way it is?
Excuse me. Yes, that's the reality on the ground.
Incredible, because it's too complicated. Got a couple comments that came in, and just sort of like what's going to happen after the fact. Like here's a comment from Ronald. What if one finds out 60 years later after birth, my mother was illegal in the U.S. at one's birth? Well, I don't think it matters. You're still a citizen, doesn't matter. But I think it's also, what about you find something out after the fact, right? After you pay the exit tax, you find out, hey, you know what? Actually, I was a dual citizen at birth. I should have paid this. Well, my most logical response was, well, make sure you file your claim for refund and within 3 years, otherwise, or 2 years of payment. Otherwise, it's going to be too late. That would just be my default. I haven't looked into that issue. We got another question here, Suzanne. Yeah, exactly. Answer the question, regardless of, I think Suzanne has it right here. And then here's a comment here. Cred, Cred, I mean, this guy is a commenter. This guy's pretty sharp here.
That's me.
This is Keith. And I would say this, Keith is getting this here. The genesis of the problem with all this is a citizenship-based taxation. But well, Keith, I would even go further, is that you have citizenship taxation, which is one layer of complexity, which is the problem,
Right.
which is a problem. So no, now we throw another problem on top of the problem.
What's that?
Immigration law that is so arbitrary and capricious, as we've been going over.
Yeah, but why is the immigration law going to be a problem?
Okay,
Let's say the U.S. gets rid of citizenship-based taxation, okay? That's the ultimate objective. And it's residency-based taxation. All this other stuff is just not going to matter.
You're absolutely right. Why are people expatriating? And the
Right.
reason is, right.
You don't
Good
need to
point,
deal with
Keith. You're
covered
right.
expatriate or anything of this sort.
Okay.
And I'm, I'm not saying anything unique. This is what John says, at the genesis of the problem.
Yeah, and
it all goes back to that.
And then Melvin's here too. Say, hey, look, this is the way it is. But as you know, anything could change. So, so maybe it's not that certainty. You have that card to play, but it's something that is subject to, something that Congress may do. So, that's a lot of trust that we could be placing in the United States government that they might not be birthed. But I want to go back to John. So, John, if you could explain us how people can benefit from being a dual citizenship at birth.
Sure. Before I do that, I want to reinforce the point here, though, so I hope this doesn't get lost, that this particular exemption is available only to people who certify tax compliance, right, for the 5 years prior to renunciation. So this is not,
right.
You can avoid the taxes. You absolutely have to you have to do the taxes. There's no doubt about it. And that can involve significant tax liabilities. I mean, if we were to go back to the Boris Johnson thing, this all hit the media because of his being subject to a capital gains tax on the sale of his principal residence. At least, I have no intimate knowledge of this, but certainly that, that's been described in the media, for years. So, it's interesting to me that a number of tax compliance firms say, oh my God, even Boris Johnson, paid this thing. But my guess on this is that he probably did pay the capital gains tax in order to certify tax compliance for a 5-year period. If in fact it was even that 5-year period, right? Maybe he waited until, was in 6, he only has to certify 5 years or something like that. But the point is that he was able to escape an exit tax on potentially millions of dollars of assets. Now, to be clear, why this is a problem, okay? Because it's probably in most countries, first of all, it's a severe erosion of capital, but it's probably going to end up double taxation problem as well in most countries, because in the U.S. taxes this stuff as a deep sale right fake income. That has nothing to do with the law in the other country. Now, there are some countries, of which Canada is one, Australia is another, that by treaty allows for a situation where one country to take a deemed sale in the other country, so that at least, you've got the matching of the dispositions at the same times, right, to avoid double taxation. I checked this morning, I do not see that provision in the UK treaty. So there's that. But here's a separate problem that is so huge, it is so significant, yet only 1 out of 10 lawyers and accountants who talk about the exit tax even mention this. And this is the separate treatment of non-US pensions for covered expatriates. Now listen carefully, let me give you an example, because this is the world that I live in, okay, the people who I work with. When people describe the exit tax, they talk about a deemed sale of assets. Yeah, that is one kind of tax, okay, for sure. But there's a second kind of tax, and that is a direct tax on non-US pensions that require a distribution, a full deemed distribution of the value of the pension on the day before expatriation. Now, to give you an example, okay, I mean, here's somebody who somehow didn't think the advice I was giving him was worth anything yet. Okay, this is a guy with a pension in Canada, a significant pension, and his net worth was well above $2 million. Now, in his particular case, okay, because it was a Canadian pension, let's say I'll make up some numbers, it's worth $1 million. He's got 300,000 of distributions. That is, get this, a $700,000 income distribution on his U.S. tax return on the day before expatriation. Now, close your eyes and imagine an extra $700,000 appearing as taxable ordinary income on your tax return that you've never even received. That's what's going on, to use Keith's language, on the ground in the real world. This is what's going on in places Canada, Australia, etc. And I want to contrast that with the following. So U.S. exit tax rules are clearly to impose, I don't think confiscation is too strong a word, okay, on non-U.S. pensions. But if it's a U.S. pension, they will escape that, okay, because as a U.S. payer, they're going to be able to treat it as not distributed, but simply pay tax on the distributions as they come out. So this is an unbelievable, egregious, unjustified, unprincipled, and I would say pure evil attack on non-U.S. pensions.
I did not see how bad that is. That you're basic. Wow, that's stunning. That's stunningly aggressive, and and this is Suzanne just put up a comment here, and it's sort of related. That it's sad that people that want to be U.S. citizens are denied or have a hard time getting it, while others with zero connection have it forced upon them in the hopes that the U.S. can confiscate money. And in either cases, the will of the people is denied. You have a government acting. No, we're gonna no. Hey, look, you want to become a U.S. citizen? Yeah, it'd be great. We're going to give you a hard time about it. Hopefully, you got a good immigration attorney. If you don't, oh well. And then having it forced down the throats of everybody. That just shows you the disconnect between the government and what the people actually want. I mean, total disconnect. This is one of the most unhinged things we could see, in that issue of that pension is so obnoxious. And that the idea here is, the whole idea of the progressive income tax, by the way, is, well, it's founded by progressives, but the more you make, the more you can afford to pay. Well, I'm sorry. Well, the pension, he didn't, when someone's forced to hand over the value of their pension, they didn't make that pension. That's what they might make, and that's what they're trying to live on for the rest of their life. This is just, I shouldn't be so surprised by how awful it is. But man, there's this, it's so, I'm trying to think of something so arbitrary and consequential. We have arbitrary things. It's like, okay, yeah, might go this way or that way, but you are looking at night and day different results that are sort of impossible for a person to apply some logic process to sort of say, okay, what's this going to make sense? And this is why we say, right, some Cred 65 says this: each case must be weighed on its own merits. It's just we're not really sure. You don't know, and this is something that, as we're going through this, how many people paid an exit tax that they shouldn't have, because they actually had a dual citizenship from birth, and that their tax professional didn't pick up on that. No one picked up on that. And that's, I mean, go ahead, Keith.
Yeah, and I go even further. One needs to really assess, when they are contemplating renouncing their U.S. citizenship, is it worth it to be U.S. tax compliant? There are situations where it is just not worth it, because you're going to lose your shirt, bottom line. And, you take the stereotypical accidental American who's never been in the U.S. tax system, has no financial assets or familial ties with the U.S. There is no reason, in my opinion, that they need to enter the U.S. tax system and lose a lot of money and a lot of retirement money to renounce. So each case needs to be weighted on its own merits based on that individual's particular profile and circumstance. So you really have to critically think and analyze the situation before you move forward.
So, and this is, and I actually, I have to get out of here really soon. I opened up my office to be the campaign headquarters for a mayoral candidate. Today's election day, so we're pretty excited. I think we got a good chance of getting it. So we do want to wrap up right here on this. John, I just want to first I would want to say this is what Keith said is absolutely right. You want to get some real advice, and this is why Keith has been telling me a lot more people have been reaching out to him because of this podcast. Reach out to him, look at everything. And honestly, sometimes a tax professional like myself or someone like John isn't the first place to start. You want to just talk to someone who talks to a lot of people, what other people are doing, because as this podcast has demonstrated how arbitrary it is and how fact dependent it is. So really reach out to Keith. Here's his email to reach out for a time to talk to him. US_overseas_advocate@outlook.com. If it's something that you're thinking of, and before you jump and talk to a tax professional, because look, I got to say things a certain way. I got to give this certain advice, and when people are ready to pull the trigger on being in compliance, that's when they contact me. I can't advise anything else other than that. Keith can give you a really great background and sort of some really information that you might be missing that could really help you make the right decisions. So
just things to think about.
Exactly. Thank you so much, Keith. John, I want to just conclude with your final words on this and where we should take it for, where we should take the discussion after this, perhaps. By the way, let me just show you John's email is citizenshipsolutions@protonmail.com. If it's something you're thinking about reaching out and expatriating, and he is the absolute expert at Canadian taxation as well. So, I mean, he's the man for Canada. I got to recommend him every which way. So, John, what would you say where we're going to go with this? What's your concluding statements? Oh, I still have you muted.
Okay, a couple of points extremely important here, okay? The dual citizenship from birth exemption applies only for people who are tax compliant. The taxes have to be filed, right? So now I understand Keith's point for people who are just kind of floating along, not necessarily renouncing, doing nothing, just accidental Americans or whatever. But I really got to say that if they're going to renounce, if they're going to formally renounce, and if they are dual citizens from birth, and if they have pensions or anything else, I mean, the pensions are a graphic example. This is a very strong argument for tax compliance, okay, in that particular case. So while agreeing, all right, that, these things have to be assessed on their merits, all right, remember that if you fall into the dual citizenship from birth category and you have assets that far exceed the 2 million thing, that you would be a covered expatriate. Remember that to get it to work for you, you do have to be tax compliant. Okay, it's up to you what you do with that information, but you've got to know what the statute actually says here. Because remember that this is an exemption from the problem of citizenship taxation, right? What it really is citizenship non-taxation. So for God's sake, understand the statute here. This is a matter of law, all right, if you want to use that, okay? Secondly, here we see again, just sort of, wrapping up on the unbelievable unfairness of this provision. I mean, let me give you an example. So you have two people born, say, in Chicago on a certain day, adjacent hospital beds, okay? One of them has parents, U.S. citizens with no other citizenship. The other, U.S. citizen, a Canadian citizen father, for example, okay? One of them is born with dual citizenship from birth. The other is not. They go forward in life. 50 years later, they're each worth $1 billion. Guess who's going to avoid the exit tax? It's purely an accident, a circumstance of birth. Barack Obama once famously said, the circumstances of a person's birth should never determine the outcome of their life. Well, this 2008 law exit tax is proof positive that under U.S. tax law, the circumstances of your birth go an awful long way to determining the outcome of your life.
Yep.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. It's pretty shocking how much it can be once you start digging through this and the arbitrariness, and it does only affect a few amount of people, but those who affects, and I mean that's the whole point of arbitrary things. It's supposed to protect everybody. But if you're on the wrong side, boy, you get it bad. But hey, look, you may luck out. Which this is the arbitrariness of our entire legal system. It gets pretty crazy. Now, I want to thank everyone who joined us today. I want to thank Keith, John, and Andy. Thank you so much for joining us today. We really appreciate that. Thank you so much. And I really want to thank the whole YouTube community. YouTube, this is the reason why my firm has been doing as well as it has. We get great clients from YouTube. And something that I just came out with is, the problem I had was that I was sending emails out and, it's hard to get in touch with me. So I came up with something, I think I've gotten on the trolley, as it were, for 2023. And I have a text-based lead system here. So if you have a tax issue, if you're thinking of disclosing, maybe you're just looking for tax savings for your business, here it is. You ready for it? Text WEALTH to 818-938-2231. And by the way, I'm not sure if it works with international numbers, so give it a try. And let me just give you my email address. So if that's not working, it's somewhere up here. And by the way, it also, and this is the thing too, is anyone who's ever heard of a covered expat audit, whether it's been yourself or your client, can you please email me at aparent@irishmedic.com? I'd love to get you on a guest. If not a guest, just get your story out. I don't believe it's ever happened where there's been a covered expat audit. I'd love to be proven wrong, and I'd love to know if someone went through that. That'd be a fantastic topic for another time. So again, I just want to thank our guests today and thank all commenters. We do really have the best audience. I mean, we have some brilliant people. Smartest people in the world, I'd say, who follow this channel. I just really thank you all for making it worthwhile and a lot of fun for all of us as we go through the terror of this. At least we can go through the terror together. This is Anthony Parent of IRS Medic for Keith Redmond and John Richardson. Thanks for watching.